taking care of a sick, elderly parent. Taking care of a sick, elderly parent. Hello, you all. I'm Dianna Brianne. Well, I just got in from the gym and I'm sweaty and dirty. Too much information, right? And I'm getting ready to take a shower and relax for the evening. But I got to thinking about this subject because I've been approached by a couple different people recently to make another video explaining my own personal journey taking care of a sick and elderly parent. And a lot of people are going through this at varying levels, some on a more serious level and some on a lighter level. And I think that in our society with baby boomers, which I guess I'm a baby boomer too at 62 years old, a late baby boomer, I don't know. You know, a lot of us have elderly parents. Now, my parents have passed, but I know a lot of other people that have parents well into their 80s and 90s. And some of those parents are very healthy and driving cars and living a very full life, while other parents are not so fortunate. And so that's why I'm coming on here tonight to talk about this subject once again. Well, let me tell you a little story about my own personal journey with taking care of a parent when they're sick and when they're aging. I was very close with my mother. My mother and I had the most incredible, wonderful mother-daughter relationship. When my husband and I got married about 30 years ago, and we moved to Europe because of his career, took us over there, it was a big and sudden kind of change for me. I didn't really want to go at first because I didn't know how often I could talk to my mother. And my mother was living in California at the time, and we were living in another state, but we talked almost every single day. And that's before it was free to call anywhere in the United States. It was like 25 or 30 cents a minute during the week. But we still called every day. Email was not around, and even fax machines, you know, we were not real savvy with at that time. But my mother and I were so close, and we had this great daily mother-daughter relationship by phone. And at that point, because I didn't no longer live close with her, my mother and I were from a small southern-like town, and we had moved to California when I was about 19 years old. And she didn't really officially move. I moved there to go to college, and then she kind of followed back and forth. And over time, she ended up settling in Palm Springs, where I was living at the time, and she stayed there until almost the last 3 years of her life. And she loved it there. She was very, very happy. It was a great place for her. And so anyhow, when I was living in Southern California, and I lived about 2 hours away in the LA area, I would drive out to see my mother once a week, and I'd stay for a night or two, and it was just so wonderful. You know, I just loved to go out there and see her, and she always had wonderful food on the table, very simple food. She always made me breakfast, and she always made sure that I was comfortable, and she just was wonderful in every single way. So anyhow, I married my husband, and then later on we moved to Europe, and my mother and I faxed each other back when fax machines were kind of still new. She bought herself a fax machine. We bought ourselves a fax machine, and because it was so expensive to call Europe, what we did was we would fax each other letters throughout the day, like once or twice or 3 times a day, and it was wonderful. We looked forward to those letters. And so we always had this very close relationship. And so, you know, years later, and with 3 small children, we were living down in Texas, and I was homeschooling my 3 small children at the time. I think they were kindergarten, first and second. And my mother was really taking ill. We had noticed that she began to have tremors a few years earlier, and the doctor told her it was just nervousness. And I told her, no, it's not nervousness, this is Parkinson's. And so I called her doctor and I said, look, I want you to send her to a special doctor to have her tested. And of course, then he did. And of course, she was tested for Parkinson's. Over time, the Parkinson's got worse and worse and worse. And later, she would develop ALS symptoms at the very tail end of her life, which were just devastating. And so, lo and behold, my mom, she tried to make it on her own out in California. And we finally realized that she could no longer do it. She was dropping the phone, and she loved to talk to me on the phone every night. We had hour-long conversations at the end of the day from about 10 to 11 o'clock at night. And my kids always called that their lullaby. They fell asleep when they heard me talking to Grandma. And but she couldn't talk anymore. She couldn't hold the phone, and she was starting to fall. And she was in her about 83 years old. So my husband was willing to go out and get her and drive her back. And at that point, she had an apartment rather than a house. And so my husband drove her back to Texas. The problem was we were in the process of moving from Texas back to Georgia. And so there, my mom, very frail, she had diapers on when she got there. And she still had her mind, but she was very, very, I don't want to say agitated, but very high strung and very emotional. And, you know, she was, even though she had about 3 more years to live, she kept thinking that she was going to die. And it was just, we had her to the emergency room and we went through all that drama, you know, and they would send her back home saying she's okay, she just has Parkinson's. And, but it was really, really difficult. And my mother was suffering some forms of dementia at that particular point. And sometimes she would just holler and holler and holler. And here I was homeschooling my 3 little children, we were in the process of moving, and I was just beginning to fall apart. I really was. I just, you know, I would go sit outside and I would just cry and cry and cry. It was such a very difficult and challenging time. I was trying to take care of my mother, be a great daughter. I was dealing with the emotions that my mother was no longer the person that I'd always known her to be. Now she was sick and very debilitated body-wise and emotional-wise, and I didn't know how long, you know, she was going to live. And here we were in the middle of the move, and I have 3 little kids, and I said, Lord, if there's any kind of sign that you can give me, I need a sign. I need a sign that things are going to be okay. And I had wanted Yard of the Year for forever, or Yard of the Month, or Yard of the Year. I can't remember what it was. I think it was Yard of the Year. And I looked out the window, and there were 2 men pounding a sign in my yard. But at that point, it didn't dawn on me what it was. And I looked out, and then I went out after the men left, and I looked at the sign, and it said either Yard of the Month or Yard of the Year. And I just started crying and crying and crying. I knew that that was my sign that everything was going to be okay. And it was actually a literal sign. And so, lo and behold, we went through the move with my mom, and oh my gosh, she fell down. She got her nose all bruised up. She fell. And we brought her across country, and you know, she was tripping and falling, and we had to hold on to her to make sure when she went into the restrooms. And there we are, you know, practically carrying her into the restrooms to go to the bathroom. And you know, people were staring at us and everything else, but you know, we had to get her across country, and I didn't want to leave her, you know, in California, or most certainly not Texas, because we were leaving there and there was no one else there. And so we made it to Georgia, and I mean, it just went from bad to worse. Her body was just going downhill. She was so very, very frail. And the medicines that she was taking was making her fall. She was losing her balance. So I padded all the rooms, I padded all the walls so that if she fell, you know, she would not hurt herself. And we carpeted the rugs very heavy and everything. And we built her like a mother-in-law suite. And so she had her own little area, but I had baby monitors so that I could monitor her, make sure she was okay. And every time she would call for me, I would run, you know, 3 flights of steps from my bedroom to her apartment, you know, her mother-in-law suite. And I mean, I was exhausted. I never looked worse in my life. I never looked worse. I was so depleted, but I was trying to do my very, very best at taking care of my mother because I loved her so much. And so I left her for about, for about 10 minutes to go pick up my kids because I put them back in public school. And, you know, she had her mind, but, you know, she just was very high strung and emotional. And when I came back, my oldest son, who was like in 3rd grade at the time, 3rd grade, I think, 4th grade, 3rd or 4th grade, I don't know. He was in 3rd or 4th grade, and he said, Grandma's on the floor. She had fallen off the chair. So I called 911. They took her to the hospital. And because she was still on California insurance, we couldn't get her into a rehabilitation center. So they sent her back home. And so I continued to take care of her. And it was very, very challenging. And but she wanted to be at home, where she didn't want to be in a nursing home or anywhere else. And I was trying to honor her request to do so. And so, you know, she had a problem with falling, and that's what I was always scared of, that she was going to fall, because she would fall. And so I was afraid to leave the house. And so, you know, even to go grocery shopping, because I was afraid she'd get up by herself and then she would fall. And so I was really I had to stay home all the time. And that put a lot of strain on my marriage, and it put a lot of strain on just everything in general. So finally, my mother, we moved to a different house. We bought a different house and had a mother-in-law suite. And she would walk down to the mailbox every day. And it scared me, but that was her thing that she loved to do, is go to the mailbox and check for the mail. That was her big outing for the day. So I let her do it, but I prayed every single time that she went down to the mailbox. She went down to the mailbox, she came back, she had a little TV dinner because that's all she would eat. She didn't eat it, she brought it out and said, give it to one of the kids. I just can't eat, I choke on the food. She went back in to lay down in her bed. About a half hour later, she called me and said, I can't get up, I can't get up, I can't move. Somehow the Parkinson's and ALS had hit her body to the point that she could no longer move. I called 911, they came and got her. And long story short, they had to put a stomach tube in her because she couldn't swallow anymore. She could not swallow. So at that point, she couldn't come back home. She had to go to a nursing home. So there I was with my 3 little kids going back and forth an hour away to the nursing home twice a day. You know, well, I'd take them once a day with me, and then the other time I would go by myself. And I remember coming home one night by myself, because I only went by myself at night. And I was coming home on the back Georgia roads. And it was dark, and I was so tired, and I almost went off the road. And I realized at that point I could no longer go twice a day. And so I narrowed it down to about 4 times a week that I went there and to check on her. And it was a good nursing home. She was well taken care of. And but she kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And the ALS and Parkinson's came to a point where it just completely, her body just began to, fall apart. I mean, she couldn't lift her head up. Her head went down to her belly button, and it was heartbreaking, and it was just horrible what this disease did to her. And so, I loved my mom so much, and it was such an emotional time for me to see my mom go through this. And I was just depleted. I was exhausted, running back and forth, and the emotions behind it, and the thought of losing my mom, who had always been my best friend. I knew I couldn't take care of her in my home because at that point, she couldn't even turn herself in bed. And so it was really, really hard. And then she had to go back to the hospital, and they gave her a blood transfusion, but the last 6 months of her life, she was out of her mind. All she did was scream and scream and scream and scream in the, at the hospital. And if I went too close to her, she would pull my hair. Anybody that came close to her, she'd pull their hair. She still had strength in her hands. And it was just terrible to see her like that. But when she had the blood transfusion, all of a sudden, she came back to the person I always knew. Her mind was as clear as a bell. And for about 2 weeks, I call it my Christmas blessing, because it happened at Christmas time, that my mother was so normal. And we had these wonderful, amazing conversations. And then she began to go downhill again. And she went back to the hospital for a second blood transfusion that just did not serve her well and did not do well. And it was during that time that she passed. And she went into a coma-like stage because her organs were all shutting down. And she went into a coma-like stage. And then I went home after being with her. And then later that night, they called me and said, come over, she's going to pass. And I got my clothes on, and my husband was there, and he was going to watch the children. And then at that particular point, they called me back and said she had already passed. And so it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking. And so anyone taking care of an elderly parent, I just applaud you. It's something that is emotional. It's an emotional roller coaster. I say get all the support that you can for caregiving, because there's no job harder than being a caregiver to a sick elderly parent, because your emotions, you're dealing with your own emotions of losing a parent, of seeing a parent go through this journey that's devastating. And then not only that, you're exhausted and tired and worn out, and your relationships become tired and worn out because you have nothing to give to your other relationships. And my children did really well during this time, and my husband was, amazing. And but it was the toughest time in my life. It really was. I never looked worse in my life, and I said I would never allow myself to ever, look that bad again. And so anyone going through it, like I said, get all the support you can, get all the help you can. Unfortunately, I didn't have anyone to help me. My sister couldn't help me, and I had no other siblings to help me. And so it was all on me. It was all on me. And if you have siblings and they're helping you, how wonderful, how blessed you are. And if you don't, I do suggest, any kind of support that you have in your community that can help you would be a wonderful opportunity for you, because you need to rest, you need to take care of yourself so that you can keep your good relationships good, and that you can continue to take care of your elderly parent, okay? And so I thought I'd share my journey with you, and I hope anyone out there who's going through this, you have my very, very best wishes, okay? So I hope you subscribe to my channel, and I hope to talk to you all soon again. So from my house to your house, God bless you, and I'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.